Okay, so good morning, everyone. Hello, good morning.
Morning,
Good
ma'am.
morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
So, welcome to Group 13 presentation. But before we will present our pre recorded discussion, we will first have a short game. So, the game is called Guess the Word. So, you just have to guess the word and put your answers in the in call messages. And don't worry because your answers will be recorded. So, are you ready?
Ready.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
let's
ma'am.
have. All right, so let's have the first word. You just have to put your answers in the in-call messages. All right. So let's check if your answers are right. So, yes, the answer is process. So let's proceed to the second word. All right, let's check if your answers are correct. So the answer is rubrics. Next. All right. So the answer for that is performance. So you guys are correct. So let's proceed to the fourth word. All right, let's check. So the answer for that is complex. And for the fifth word, so gasagol no, na simple and then napoy sample. So let's check if also do the answer for that. So the answer for that is simple. So thank you for your active participation. Now we will present our pre-recorded discussion.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion. By the way, we are the Group 13, and our topic is about process oriented assessment. I am Charluti Kailing, and I am Marie Camille Mancaw. Before anything else, our learning objectives for this discussion are first, define performance based assessment, second, discuss process oriented assessment, and lastly, differentiate analytic rubric and holistic rubric. So before we will tackle about the process-oriented assessment, we will introduce you first on what is performance-based assessment. So performance-based assessment measures skills such as the ability to integrate knowledge across disciplines, contribute to the work of a group, and develop a plan of action when confronted with a new situation. Performance assessments are also appropriate for determining if students are achieving the higher standards set by the states for all students. So, in its simplest terms, a performance assessment is one which requires students to demonstrate that they have mastered specific skills and competences by performing or producing something. So there are three types of performance-based assessment from which to choose according to Mack, Teghey, and Ferrara from 1998. First is the products,
second, performances, and the third is the process-oriented assessments. Now, we will tackle about our topic, which is the process-oriented assessment. So, process-oriented assessment is concerned with the actual task performance rather than the output or product of an activity. Process-oriented performance-based assessment evaluates the actual task performance. It does not emphasize on the output or product of the activity. This assessment aims to know what processes a person undergoes when given a task. So, kaning process-oriented assessment is naga-focus more on sa giunsa pag-process sa usa ka tawo ang gihatag nga performance task sa teacher. Its learning competencies. First, the learning objectives in process-oriented performance-based assessment are stated in direct observable behaviors of the students. Second, competencies are defined as groups or cluster of skills and abilities needed for a particular task. So, for example, the task is to recite a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, which is entitled The Raven. For the objectives, the activity aims to enable the students to recite a poem entitled The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, the process of reciting the poem must be first, recite the poem from memory without referring to notes. Second, use appropriate hand and body gestures in delivering the piece. Third, maintain eye contact with the audience while reciting the poem. And fourth, create the ambience of the poem through appropriate rising and falling intonation. And lastly, pronounce the words clearly and with proper diction.
A competency is said to be more complex when it consists of two or more skills. That is why we have simple and complex competencies. These are the simple competencies. First, speak with a well-modulated voice. Second, draw a straight line from one point to another point. Third, color a leaf with a green crayon. While these are the complex competences, recite a poem with feeling using appropriate voice quality, facial expressions, and hand gestures. Construct an equilateral triangle given three non-collinear points, and draw and color a leaf with green crayon.
So let's proceed to task designing. So in task designing, learning tasks are need to be carefully planned. In particular, the teacher must ensure that the particular learning process to be observed contributes to the overall understanding of the subject or course. As a teacher, you are not just designing tasks just for the sake of doing so. It has to be well thought and well planned. So here are some of the accepted standards for designing a task. First, identifying an activity that would highlight the competencies to be evaluated. For example, reciting a poem, writing an essay, and manipulating the microscope. Second, identifying an activity that would entail more or less the same sets of competencies. If an activity would result in too many possible competencies, then the teacher would have difficulty assessing students' competency on the task. Third, finding a task that would be interesting and enjoyable for the students. Tasks such as writing an essay are often boring and cumbersome for the students.
So, for example, the topic is on understanding biological diversity. Its possible task design is bring the students to a pond or creek. Ask them to find all living organisms they can find living near the pond or creek. Also, bring them to the school playground to find as many living organisms they can. Observe how the students will develop a system for finding such organisms, classifying the organism, and concluding the differences in biological diversity of the two sites. Note, according to Navarro et al. 2013, with this new normal, process-oriented performance-based is quite challenging for the teachers, but it can still be possible by letting the students record their actual performance.
So now, let's proceed to the scoring rubrics. So this scoring rubrics is used to measure student performance against a predetermined set of criteria. A rubric or scoring scale, which contains the essential criteria, is typically created. So according to McTague and Ferrara, rubric is a generic scoring tool used to evaluate a student's performance in a given outcome area. So kaning nga rubrics, magamit ni siya sa process-oriented assessment. So this table shows an example of a rubric or a scoring scale which covers the actual performance of the task in an English class. So there are 4 criteria in the table. First, the number of appropriate hand gestures. Second, the appropriate facial expressions. Third, the voice inflection. And fourth, the incorporate proper ambience through feelings in the voice. The criteria will be leveled by 1, 2, and 3. So sa kinunhan nga criteria, which is the number of appropriate hand gestures, naa siya 1 point if 1 to 4 ang iyahang number of appropriate hand gestures. If 5 to 9, naa siya 2 points. If 10 to 12, naa siya 3 points. Sa appropriate facial expressions, naa siya 1 point if there is lots of inappropriate facial expression. Naa siya 2 points if there is few of inappropriate facial expression. And naa siya 3 if there is no apparent inappropriate facial expression. So for the third criteria, which is the voice inflection, ang score or ang points ani is times 2. 1 if the monotone voice used. 2 if can vary voice inflection with difficulty. 3 if it can easily vary voice inflection. So ang last na criteria, which is the incorporate proper ambience through feelings in the voice, ang ihatag ng points is times 3 na siya. So sa 1 point, if ang recitation contains very little feelings, na siya 2 points if ang recitation has some feelings, and 3 if the recitation fully captures ambience through feelings in the voice. So sa gihatag na example, mabantayan nato ang descriptors. So what is descriptors? So descriptors spells out what is expected of students at each level of performance. It helps the teachers more precisely and consistently distinguish student work. So let's go back to the example. So as we can see, the descriptors here is kaning lots of inappropriate facial expression, few of inappropriate facial expression, no apparent inappropriate facial expression, kaning monotone voice, akila sa ning mga recitation taman nga nabilong sa 1, 2, and 3. Mo na siya ang descriptors kay ay according to the meaning, no, it spells out what is expected of students at each level of performance.
So, let's proceed to the 2 components of rubric, namely criteria and levels of performance. So, what is criteria? Criteria is a standard or principle for judging, evaluating, or selecting something. On the other hand, levels of performance means assessed skill development in academic or other areas such as adaptive functioning, behavior, cognition, etc. So, why do we include the levels of performance? It is because for clearer expectations, for more consistent and objective assessment, and for better feedback. For clearer expectations, because it is very useful for the students and the teacher if the criteria are identified and communicated prior to completion of the task. For more consistent and objective assessment, because the levels of performance permit the teacher to more consistently and objectively distinguish between good and bad performance or between superior, mediocre, and poor performance. For better feedback, because the teacher and the students can more clearly recognize areas that need improvement, and it is according to Navarro et al. 2013.
So there are two types of rubric, the analytic rubric and the holistic rubric. So if we compare or differentiate the analytic rubrics versus holistic rubrics, analytic rubrics has two-dimensional rubrics with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows, while holistic rubrics has single criteria rubrics, one-dimensional, which is used to assess participants' overall achievement on an activity or item based on predefined achievement levels. Analytic rubrics allows you to assess students' achievements based on multiple criteria using a single rubric, while holistic rubrics as performance descriptions, which are written in paragraphs and usually in full sentences. In analytic rubrics, you can assign different weights or value to different criteria and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria written in a table form, while the holistic rubrics does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. Instead, a holistic rubric assigns a level of performance by assessing performance across multiple criteria as a whole. So the last comparison for analytic rubrics provides several scores for the task, one for each different category being evaluated. While the holistic rubrics is it provides a single score to summarize a student's performance on a given task. So mauna ang kalahian sa analytic rubrics versus the holistic rubrics.
So para mas makasabot mo sa difference sa analytic o holistic rubric, maghatag ng example. So mao ni siya ang analytic rubric o mao ni siya ang holistic rubric. Kay di ba ang analytic rubric is two-dimensional, right? So kaning quality of information, critical thinking, collaboration, etc. Mao ni siya na belong ni siya sa levels of achievement. While kani exemplary, good, marginal, etc. na belong ni siya sa assessment criteria. So two-dimensional jud ang analytic rubric. So ang holistic rubric is a single criteria raman siya. And makita nato sa table nga ang nakabutang is exceeds expectations, meet expectations, o fails to meet expectations. So meaning ana, sa ang table is one-dimensional ra siya.
So that's all for our topic about process-oriented assessment.
I hope that you learned something about it. So thank you
Thank you.
guys.
And goodbye.
Bye.
So that's all for our presentation. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, ma'am.